Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and this is Red Lines. My guest today is Colombian journalist Laura Capote. She joins me now to discuss the latest events out of the country. And Laura, I'm wondering if you can just give us a description of what's happened over the most recent days and hours as far as you're aware.
Hi Anya, thanks for the invitation. Okay, first, the news in Colombia over the last 12 days has been very difficult, but at the same time, very hopeful. The humanitarian news today is dramatic. Yesterday, the president ordered the occupation of 10,000 police and 2,000 army soldiers in the city of Cali, and the governor of the department of Valle del Cauca closed the traffic coming out of the department. And during the afternoon yesterday, very serious images were seen where civilians, all upper class and big vans, shot at the Guardia Indígena, a figure of peaceful protection that is historical in the mobilizations. All this in the presence of the police. Today, there are 9 people seriously wounded.
And the media initially claimed these demonstrations were all about a proposed tax law, but is it that simple, really? Because these protests have continued even though Duque announced a withdrawal of that law.
Yeah, that's right. Really, it's not simple because the tax reform proposal was the straw that broke the camel's back of an unsustainable national, social, economic, political, health, and humanitarian crisis. The growing rejection of the people to the government policies has increased as a result of the decision of Iván Duque and Álvaro Uribe to deepen the violence in the country, a situation that is already unsustainable and that is during the pandemic not only worsened but prioritized, for example, the purchase of weapons over the purchase of medical supplies during 2020. On this way, the tax reform was the last impulse that ended up leading to a giant mobilization that was about to arrive imminently.
And who does Duque represent exactly?
Duque, it's the law, and Duque represents first the proposed law sought with the excuse of the economic crisis of the pandemic to increase taxes on the working class. Among these sought to increase the value-added tax VAT to the family basket, that is to say to the basic products of consumption of any family. It also saw the workers earning more than $500 a month should pay an income tax. It also sought to increase the rates of tolls and even put tolls within the cities, among many other regressive measures. Duque was forced to withdraw the proposed law due to the huge demonstrations, but on the same day, he ordered the militarization of all the country. Although the rejection of the tax reform was one of the main demands on the first day of the national strike, there is also a whole list of demands the national government has not listened to. Among these, withdraw the health reform, the fulfillment of the peace agreement signed in 2016, the commitment to protect the lives of the social leaders, reform police and military doctrine that has repressed more than 1,000 people and killed 47 only in these 12 days. Iván Duque represents the sector of the Colombia ultra-right embodied in the Uribista project, which goes beyond Álvaro Uribe himself. It is a counterinsurgency project of state terrorism that since 2002 has plunged Colombia into a dramatic and painful war.
And you mentioned the former president Álvaro Uribe. He's made statements, some very questionable tweets, calling everyone participating in the demonstrations vandals. What exactly is his role in this crackdown and in this state repression?
The role played by Álvaro Uribe is central. Even before the national strike began, he criminalized through his social networks, especially on Twitter, all those who were calling for the mobilizations. After 2 days of the strike on April 30th, Álvaro Uribe asked the armed forces to use their weapons against the demonstrating population, whom he systematically calls terrorists, following the U.S. doctrine of criminalizing the political opposition with arguments such as the fight against terrorism. After this tweet, which in a country as militarized as Colombia is interpreted as an order, signs who really is the political leader of the Eurovision is the former president. Human rights violations and police attacks increased dramatically. Yesterday, the governing part of which he is the leader, the Centro Democrático Party, called in a public statement in the webpage for a permanent armed presence in the country. As of today, 45 people have been killed.
Can you give listeners a summary of the violent war the Colombian state has waged against human rights defenders in recent years and recent months? You mentioned that one of the demands of protesters is that the government implement the peace agreement signed in 2016. How does this relate to the demonstrations?
Yes, that's right. The Colombian state has deep-rooted practice of military treatment of social protests. Every demonstration that takes place in our country is treated by the state as if it were in a war camp. In this way, we can see how only in 12 days, the police during the days represses demonstration regardless of the age of the protesters, their health conditions, and of course, without respecting any basic rights. At night is the worst part. Since with the darkness, they take the opportunity to go out to hunt the demonstrators, and also to beat and torture anyone who passes through the streets, just to reinforce the need to implant terror in the population and stop them from demonstrating. As of today, May 10th, 45 people have been killed by the police and paramilitary groups, 2,000 cases of police violence, and almost 1,000 people arrested. 12 people sexually accused. In spite of these figures, the government only calls for more actions by the security forces and more repression. In a broader perspective, it is important to remember that in the 3 years of Ivan Duque's government, more than 8,000 social leaders and more than 2,000 former FARC combatants have been killed for political reasons.
Since we were talking about the crackdown, the violence that has been waged against human rights defenders, I'm wondering, can you describe the situation? There are paramilitaries that are responsible for most or many of these deaths, but are they different from the police? Is there a relationship between the two forces?
Formally, they differ, of course, in that the police and the armed forces are legal institutions protected by the state, while the paramilitary groups are private armed groups. However, in the case of Colombia specifically, from the social organization, we propose that the paramilitarism in Colombia is a state policy. That is, in the Colombian case, taking into account the conflict that we have lived for more than 16 years. That state has created, financed, and accepted the action of paramilitary structures that in many parts of the country have acted jointly to ensure the same interest. Institutionally, they have even developed since Álvaro Uribe was governor of Antioquia and proposed the creation of the structures called Convivir, which is short where private land security groups which had the full support of the state in carrying out massacres and assassinations. Of the total number of victims of the conflict, at least 18% are victims of paramilitary groups, which are also trained by mercenaries from the School of the Americas and other international groups.
And what economic factors are contributing to these protests?
The economic and social crisis in Colombia is very dramatic. Official reports estimate monetary poverty at 42% of the population. We're talking about 21 million people. Extreme poverty at 15%, 7 million people, and unemployment at 51% informally. In addition to the difficulties for vaccination and economic reactivation of the crisis dependent by the pandemic.
What do you think about the response of the international community to this violence, to the treatment of the Colombian people? Have media outlets paid proper attention to it?
The role of the international community in the visibility of a conflict such as the Colombian one is very, very important, both to hide and to show what is happening in our country. Throughout history, the international community has decided to turn its back on our conflict. And in recent years, despite having had peace agreements accompanied by the international community, after the signing of the agreements, it seems that we had disappeared from the map. That is why today so many ask us what happened in Colombia. Hadn't they signed the peace? But they forget that during these last 5 years after the signing, the peace agreement has been systematically breached by the state, and neither the Santos government, much less the Duque government, have been interested in fulfilling it. This means that all the tools in the agreement which sought to democratize society are on hold due to the state refusal to comply with the agreement. At this difficult juncture, since April 28, the international community has been reacting slowly and timidly, and very few dare to call what is happening in Colombia by its name, a systematic violation of human rights by a state that handed over power to the armed forces. It is very important than ever that the international community strongly rejects the repression happening today in Colombia and the militarization of the country.
There have been a few individuals making comments about Colombia. I want to turn first to Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who recently tweeted the following message. Behind much of the violence occurring in Colombia this week is an orchestrated effort to destabilize a democratically elected government by left-wing narco-guerrilla movements and their international Marxist allies. Laura, what do people in Colombia think when they hear Marco Rubio say these things?
This is a very old story. The recent statements by Marco Rubio and Leopoldo López and other right leaders around the world follow the Duque's government strategy of installing the old and worn-out narrative that the demonstrations are guerrilla-driven and that they are criminals and all of those imaginary ideas. It is not at all surprising since López, Rubio, Duque, and their henchmen are part of the same international armada of criminalization of the political opposition and exaltation of the Uribe government, which they want to showcase as an international example of democracy. But with all the diffusion that the repression of the state has had, the theater they had set up is over, and now it is possible to see their true faces, and they hide behind the defense of democracy, which is nothing more than an applause to the militarist and dictatorial forms in Colombia, which they seek to expand to the whole region.
You mentioned Leopoldo López, that's the Venezuelan opposition leader. He also went on Twitter and denounced extreme violence occurring in the Colombian protests, even though these are people getting gunned down and hunted down who are unarmed. And meanwhile, Lopez himself has participated in extremely violent protests in Venezuela, called for terrorism against the state. That's why he's in Spain now, hiding from charges. But a little bit of an ironic statement coming from Lopez there. Finally, Laura, then what will it take to achieve political change in Colombia with all these difficulties you described?
We have to do a lot of things. First, the political will of the state is needed to comply with the peace accords, peace agreements, and other agreements signed with the social movements. It requires a state that does not turn its back on the people and the needs that the organizations present to it. There is a country that demands to be heard. There is a country that needs real solutions to the multiple dramatic situation it suffers daily, and the state denies the possibility of this transformation. These mobilizations are demonstrating that the strength of the people is enormous, but that is also needs international help to make visible what is happening. We need the fulfillment of what has been signed, but also the continuation of other peace process with armed actors and the necessary prosecution of those two as part of the armed forces and the police have committed atrocities and murders against civilians. Colombia needs a profound democratic transformation based on peace and social justice, and a construction in unity with the rest of Latin America and Caribbean.
Colombian journalist Laura Capote, thank you so much. Where can viewers follow you to receive information about Colombia?
Yes, Laura P. Capote is my Twitter account.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you.